I'm Sam Scalacci. I'm the head of engineering here at Box. I just wanted to give these guys a quick introduction. This should be an interesting conversation. One of the things that we think is really interesting about why are we sorry guys? I don't know why we're hearing music.
Let's go. Always.
Sorry. Hang on. Redo. Whoever. One of the things I think is really interesting about modern enterprise software is that it's got this really strong consumer component. And so we're talking tonight about how you build a consumer front or an end user first enterprise company. So we're going to have a panel here, moderated, I have mangled names, so I got to look at my notes, I apologize. It's moderated by Mariana Tessel, who's the head of engineering at Docker, SVP of engineering. Thank you for coming. And our three panelists are Reshma Khilnani, who's one of our Boxer folks, who's a founder of a company called MedXT, Eric Brescia from Bitnami, and Nancy Hua from Apptimize. All of these folks are founders of their own companies, so they understand what it's like to be doing a company from the start, and so I think they have some good things to say. Before I let them get started, I just want to point out, we're going to do a really awesome Box Dev developer conference in about a month. If you guys go over to the stations over here, you can sign up for free because you're here. So it's a pretty cool event. It was like 800 people last year. Very exciting. There's some great speakers this time. Some really interesting things to talk about. So if you're at all interested, please come, and I'll get my ugly face off the stage and let these guys talk. Thanks for coming.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. By the way, we just met now, so we're going to play as if we're all friends. Okay. I'm going to start with the introductory questions. I'm just curious if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, a little bit about your roles, and maybe more specifically, what are you actually currently working on?
Hi everyone, I'm Reshma. I'm on the engineering team here at Box. Last quarter, in fall 2014, Box acquired my company, MedXT, that did medical data management. Specifically, like the images that go with your medical health record, like if you've ever had an MRI or CAT scan or digital pathology, we handle, parse those files, capture them from devices, etc. And we're bringing the power of online viewing and management of that to Box, and that's what I do now.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica Brescia. I'm the founder and COO of Bitnami. We're the app store for service software, so we provide over 100 different one-clickable deployable packages for all of the major cloud platforms, as well as local and virtual deployments. And as COO, I focus mostly on business development and also like operational growth and scaling the company.
I'm Nancy. I'm the CEO and founder of Apptimize. We let you make instant updates to your native Android and iOS apps. Our company is now 2 years old. We just announced our Series A, and we're working with customers like Capital One, Nook, Flippergram, eBay. So most of our problems right now are getting more of the customers like that.
Cool. And I'm just curious, how do you find yourself in the tech world and this particular role that you have?
I think I decided to start Apptimize because I wanted to make a really big impact and try to increase the risk that I was taking in my life. I used to do algorithmic trading, and I was pretty successful at that and thought I was going to do that forever because I wasn't thinking about what I wanted to do really, and I was good at it and liked it. But I realized that now there's an opportunity for people to make or create billions of dollars worth of value in a few years. And I think, like a century ago, that was not possible. You would have to conquer Asia or something to do stuff like that. Well, I don't know, maybe it was like 5 centuries ago. But now you can do that, in a few years if you're really good and lucky. I realized that it would be a disservice if I didn't try to do something like that, and Apptimize seemed like the best bet that I could make because the specific problem that we're addressing is something that I view as something that's inevitable that we need to solve. Right now, there's a lot of barriers to developing on mobile, and we're reinventing that whole process. I see the whole the whole App Store deployment process, everyone putting every change on a roadmap as something that's clearly suboptimal and not going to be the case in 5 years, 10 years. I can't see that being reality. And Apptimize is about being rewarded for driving that change.
So my father's an entrepreneur. I always knew that I wanted to start my own company. I tried to sell tadpoles and painted rocks and everything else, even when I was a kid. Quickly learned the laws of supply and demand through some of those efforts. But I've always been interested in technology, and I met my co-founder, their mutual friend, and actually was just helping him out between jobs before going to join another startup, and got really hooked on the vision for the company. Like Nancy, our mission is to bring great software to everyone, and traditionally installing server apps, whether it was on a local machine or in the cloud, was something that was incredibly difficult, and it kind of restricted access to software to a lot of people. And the opportunity that we saw with Bitnami was pretty tremendous to bring, this great software to everyone, starting with open source, which I think we might talk about later, as well as commercial apps. And yeah, it's great. We're already reaching over 1 million people a month, and I think the sky's the limit from there.
So my story's a little bit different. I didn't really ever think about starting an enterprise software company. It's not like I love enterprise sales or anything like that. In fact, I've always had a consumer tech background. Before I started MedXT, I was working at Facebook. But I was really inspired by this really strange thing you see in healthcare, which is that they always use these very antiquated systems. They have their old machines that they use that run their own networking protocol and use their own weird file format. And that really shapes the strange experience that we have today, where we have to keep refilling our forms out wherever we go to a new hospital and things like that. And I became very interested in that specific problem. And that's what catalyzed my startup MedXT.
Interesting. So it sounds like you stumbled upon the field. I'm kind of curious, Eric and Nancy, did you also have this, did you always think you're going to be an enterprise, and were able to you were stumbling upon?
Absolutely not in my case. In fact, we actually started out with Bitnami more focused on reaching developers, and we've been really pulled into the enterprise as expectations around access to software are changing, and the consumerization of IT, I'm sure you've all heard about. That's really what's kind of driven us into the enterprise. It was totally not intentional.
Does this work? Yes. I think it's really hard to go into a startup and already know that you would do enterprise, because it's not like, as a normal person, you would ever even know that this category of companies exists, because they're not targeting you. After you start an enterprise startup, then you're like, oh, here are all these gigantic companies that are worth billions of dollars that I'd never heard of before, but now I see around me everywhere. I think it's a whole new ecosystem that you fall into after you kind of go deeper into the rabbit hole.
Cool. So I'm curious, what is the biggest challenge for you right now that you're working on in your company? Could be a technology challenge, some other challenge.
So for me, we're growing really quickly. We are primarily bootstrapped, so we've taken very little money, and the money that we have taken, we have never touched. And we stayed small for a really long time. We were 15 people last year. We're 30 today, but I think we're going to be 40 in a week and a half with all the people that we're in the process of hiring, and I think we'll be 60 plus by the end of the year. And going from a very engineering heavy company with very few business people to really building out the whole executive team and growing the teams around them is really challenging, particularly when you kind of have already developed a culture that's so engineering centric and engineering driven. And I spend probably 80% of my time right now around just making sure we get the right people in place, and that we get the right processes in place to help people be successful as their jobs. So there's lots of new tools that we're using and new processes and things like that. And I try to be very thoughtful about making sure that we're not over optimizing for process too. It's a really delicate balance between putting too much stuff in place too early, but also making sure that people have the tools that they need to be successful. And that's from an operational perspective. From a business perspective, just briefly, like the space that we're in is changing dramatically and incredibly quickly, and Mariana probably knows this better than anyone. We've been following containers for a long time, but it's certainly taken off thanks to the work that Docker's done. And that is going to have a major impact on our business, and we're adding support for containers just like everyone else, but taking a look at how that's going to impact enterprise software deployments in the future is something that we're spending a lot of time on, and that's changing really quickly.
I think the hardest part for me right now is scaling my own abilities and the abilities of my team. I think it's part of why you do a startup, because you want to condense multiple years of experience into less time. I think for now, I feel like it's a factor of 6, where I'm getting like 6 years of experience for every 1 year in my startup. And my goal is to make it 6 years of awesome experience and not like, 6 years of pain condensed into 1 year of really intense suffering. So far it's been like, 6 years of awesomeness and growth in, 1 year, per 1 year of like time in my life. I think that I talk with my team about this all the time. Like if you start doing something and you're doing it for the first time, there's no reason you would be better than average at it. You'd be like a 5 out of 10 at this thing, especially if it's a really hard thing like enterprise sales. And then, if you are just staying the same level, in 2 months, you're like now a 3 out of 10. And that's terrible. And to be a successful startup, you need to be a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, because, if you're less than that, you're gonna die. Because 80% of startups plus die, so you can't be in that bottom percent. And to accelerate at that rate while all these changes that Erica is mentioning are happening is like pretty hard, because it's not just running in the same place. Like to stay in the same place, you have to like actually surpass your competitors. And to do that, you have to have an incredible amount of focus on what it is that you're learning, how it is that you're learning that thing, how it is that you're learning it at 10 times the rate that any normal person would learn it, and how you're actually also innovating on top of these things that you've learned. So it's my role in particular, I feel like I have to level up like every week, where I feel like my concerns every week are just totally different than they were like 2 weeks ago, because our company is just changing that fast. And I don't want to get outdated as the CEO. I don't want to not be like the best person for that role anymore. And I think about that with my team all the time too. I think, if we become a company worth billions of dollars, each person on my team right now will have like 100 direct reports, and they should be upping their game to anticipate that future. So all of that learning, I think that's part of why startups can pay you less than a normal company, because you're like, at a normal company, like looking at it from another perspective, you're like getting paid to not grow at that rate. Like this is what Peter Thiel will say to people. But at a startup, you're getting paid less money, but you're actually growing at a much faster rate. But you have to actually be really intentional to do that. You'll actually wash out of your startup if you're not strategic.
So one of the things very particular to enterprise software, since we're talking about enterprise software today, is the balance between like customizability. Each business is unique, has unique requirements, and like having a consistent experience. And I think for us here at Box, like we have a very good footprint of customers, each with specific requirements and a high bar for quality, and really like keeping on the right path with regards to kind of introducing complexity and managing, the required complexity is an art, and that's one of our big challenges. And you can see like, bringing on a specific medical vertical. This is a very specific use case, and the trade-offs between something specific versus something general.
Cool. So we are talking about enterprise today, so we should get into the topic. And Erica, I'm glad you mentioned containers. Like we say, use contain yourself. On enterprise, there seems to be a trend back towards enterprise after years of this was a little bit less of a desired field. Do you agree with that? And so what do you think why do you think that is?
So with regards to the trend towards more enterprise products, I think of it as a demographic shift, actually. Let's think about the millennials, people born between 1980 and 2000. If you think of them as a wave, the crest of the wave was 1990, about 4 million and change people born. Now think, 1990, 2004, they're 14. 2008, they're 18. You know, they need stuff for college. We see a huge boom in all these things. 2015, they're 25. They're joining the workforce. And this is going to change the way we work. These are people who can't let go of their phone, can't function without their digital stuff. And this is going to be a really important shift in the workplace overall. We're going to need a whole new set of tools.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I mentioned this before with like the consumerization of IT, and that's exactly part of what's driving it. I mean, there's so many consumer apps, and the people who are buying enterprise IT are still consumers in their free time, right? They still have app phones, or iPhones, sorry. They're still getting used to consuming things a certain way. And between, kind of the App Store effect and SaaS, and open source, people are just used to things being easier and instant gratification, and that's getting pulled into their work lives as well.
Taking a slightly different perspective, I think that you should definitely join or start an enterprise company versus a consumer company, because I think that consumer companies are just much worse, or like enterprise companies are just superior. Yeah. Enterprise companies are superior to consumer companies in probably every way, except that your parents don't know what you do anymore or something. But who cares, right? I think that you're making a much bigger impact. You can create a lot more value. You're helping another business make money. You can be much more innovative. I think it's often hard to innovate for consumers. I don't know. I think there's a lot of stuff with enterprise technology that is just way more advantageous. It's way less of a random lottery. It's more like you can actually get rewarded for just doing something better. And I also think it's more motivating to feel like you're helping these people make more money. So what if they can't access, if they're not as connected with their friends? Okay, sure, maybe that's marginally less benefit for them, but I find it much more motivating to think about how I'm making this company so much more on their bottom line. It's super measurable, and they would not have all these jobs and stuff without me. I think that's much more important. So if you're thinking about doing a startup, I would totally look into this space, and I think that's what people are realizing. They're realizing that consumer is just what they know about because they're consumers, but that this whole other world of stuff is better. So you want to start looking into enterprise companies for you to join and participate in.
Nancy, I'm not sure we got it. Do you think consumer or enterprise better? Or you weren't clear on that, right? Just kidding. Okay, so but however, there is a challenge with enterprise. How do you get your message out there? How do you talk about your company? It's easier to relate to a consumer product, and how do you articulate what your company is doing?
So for MedXT, we would use a lot of comparisons to consumer products to help people understand better. So we were doing medical imaging. So we would say it's a medical grade photo sharing app. There's a special medical image format. You can view it online, and it really, at its essence, that's the core of what it is. And I think analogies are pretty, useful in that sense. But that doesn't really help you get customers. I think for a young enterprise company, you have to absolutely fight for your first customers. We would tell people that we were doing consulting, and we would consult for them because they won't buy an unproven product, and we would install our product for them and make it run. And really, you need to fight to give your customers the experience that will wow them, get your foot in the door. And if you're thinking about starting an enterprise company or going to work for a smaller one of the things to think about is do they have their first 5 customers or first 10 customers? And that means a lot. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a very important part of the process.
Yeah, and we're a little different, so we take a very bottoms-up approach. People come in, we power a ton of shadow IT. So people come to us because they have an acute problem they want to solve, right? They either want to get a development environment running for Rails or Django or something like that, or they want to deploy a collaboration app like Exo or Alfresco for internal use. And they go to their IT department, it's going to take 8 weeks to get a server racked and up and running, and then they find this thing called Bitnami, and they go click, 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 and all of a sudden they have their app up and running and working. So we're much more focused right now on actually driving very widespread adoption and making Bitnami the standard place you go whenever you want to get a piece of server software, either for eval or educational purposes or to deploy in production. And our enterprise product is still kind of coming together. And it's hard. Like, we use analogies, we talk about the App Store effect and things like that, but it is really hard to explain what you do, and I have spent more hours than I will ever admit to anyone trying to figure out how to explain to people what our company does, and we still haven't totally nailed it yet.
So messaging is a thing that I've taken a really experimental approach on, partially because what we do at Apptimize is a lot of A/B testing. So we enable a lot of apps to do A/B testing that they can't do otherwise. So how I find messaging, I'll like try the one that I'm playing with right now, but to give you the macro picture of how I do it is I just do experiments on people who know me. So or people that I don't even. So like I'll go up to them and be like, you know, you're meeting them, and then I'll just tell them the pitch that I'm working on at that moment, and I'll see if it hits. I'll see if they look like they understand it. If they don't, I try to fix it, you know, and then I just keep talking with them until they understand it, and then I try to tune in on that message. So the one I'm working on right now is I'll say to the person like, and this can be anyone, like you like meet them at a party, you're just like talking with some random person, and like you become an extrovert if you're a startup founder. I was not an extrovert before, but I am now. So you just get used to like talking with random people so that you can do these like impromptu experiments. So now I'm like, okay, so you know, what's your favorite app? So like my cab driver, and then he'll be like, I don't know, Pinterest or whatever, and then I'll be like, okay, well how many product iterations do you think it took to get that app so perfect and so beautiful that you love it, that it's your favorite? And he'll be like, I don't know. And I'll say like, you know, well, it was hundreds, if not thousands. And if you're playing by the rules of the App Store and the normal, like, established app deployment process, you can really only get 30 deployments out per year, 30 different versions of your app out to the wild, because it's a really long process where you're like, and this is moving as fast as possible. Almost no one moves at that speed. Like, the average app moves like 4 times a year. Like, they get 4 product iterations out per year. So they never have a chance to get to that point where they have the resources to become your favorite app. They'll just never get there. They run out of resources. So the apps that are your favorite app, they're either, you know, they won the lottery and they just got lucky and they got there like in version 2 or whatever, or they have the resources because there are these huge companies that are like Nike or whatever that are like funneling millions of dollars into this app and then can get those deployments out. So like I'm trying that pitch right now, and that's like more relating to them. But I think you just have to experiment. You have to try a lot of different things, try to connect it to that person, that audience, so that they know like, okay, this is how it's affecting my life, or something like that. But it's still super, super hard, and it's also really tailored, so you have to A/B test it a lot.
If I can actually add a few things in there that have worked for us, you know, by way of advice, I guess, one thing that we've spent a lot of time on is talking to users and customers and actually trying to pull our messaging out of them. So we've done hundreds and hundreds of customer calls, and we keep notes where anyone in the company can access them, where we write down basically everything they tell us. So that's one way we've collected information and feedback from users about what message resonates with them. And then another thing that we do is regular user surveys. And what we ask them is, how do you explain Bitnami to your friends? And that's actually how our tagline, which is one click to application awesomeness, that's where it came from. It seems kind of silly to have awesome in a tagline, but I was reading through our survey results from a few surveys ago, and it just kept coming up and coming up and coming up, and that kind of helped us realize what was resonating with people and how they thought of us, and it kind of helped us get our messaging to the next imperfect iteration.
I think the App Store for the server is pretty good.
I think that's PG, actually. That's PG. Yeah. He also had some really bad ideas, though. So it's good.
So deeper than messaging, is it you know, there's always this thing when I talk to consumer people, they always like tend to explain things to their grandmothers or something. It's always like, oh, my grandmother understands what I do. You know, and it seems like it's a little harder in enterprise. So I don't know, unless you experiment sometimes with grandparents. But is there challenge in recruiting there because people have a harder time to connect to, you know, they might not necessarily be the users. And so, like, is it like different by function? Like, you know, is it harder for engineering? Is there other functions to Can you talk about the fact that it's harder to connect because I'm not the third user and how it impacts your company?
So I do think that there are differences in like people's reactions to the products. You know, working at Facebook, you could definitely see recruits and like your parents and grandparents like be like, oh, I understand that, or I've heard a lot of people use that, and you know, they would feel a draw to it. I mean, one thing with enterprise that resonates with a big segment of people is that you feel like you're doing something very meaningful, you're impacting people's work versus something trite. So that's kind of I hear, you know, both sides. I don't want to like have like a specific, you know, one is better, one is not, but you do see kind of a meaningfulness feeling to the people who do enterprise, and they really like start to have a strong identification with the meaningfulness of their work.
I think a lot of people are drawn to the challenge too of enterprise. So, I mean, there are some really cool consumer apps out there and that are doing amazing things, and I'm a happy user of a lot of them, but most consumer apps don't solve like really hard problems. Like the stuff that you're working on at Docker, or the stuff that you did at MedXT, or the stuff that you're working on, like they're really hard technical problems, they're hard strategic problems, and I think that draws a certain type of person, and it just so happens that that's the kind of person that we want to hire. It is harder with different generations, so there definitely I think is the attitude with the millennials, that they really love the idea of working on all these apps because they've seen all these companies become wildly successful, and they use the apps and they can relate to them, as you mentioned. And they're certainly drawn to some of those things. Like, it's a lot sexier to work on a dating app or something like that than on server software deployment. Like, I get that. But what we do is really focus on the impact that we can have, the number of people that they're going to be reaching, how we can impact the businesses that we're working with. And it doesn't help that we work with really cool, like very cutting edge technologies. So I think with developers at least, that kind of overrides the enterprise thing. And with more senior people, like I think a lot of folks who've been in the business for a long time, they kind of know enterprise, they know how it works, they know how big the opportunity is. And they both want to stay in their comfort zone, and also like the app space just isn't as interesting because there is somewhat of a lottery effect in some cases.
I like hiring for the enterprise. I think we haven't, I don't know, we just have not had this people asking for jobs at my company who are interested in consumer, and I'm very happy with this. I think that people have heard of us, they like know that we're installed on probably most of your phones right now, but you don't have to care about that. Like, this doesn't affect you. Like, you'll just realize, like, if you're actually comparing your version of your app to like someone else's, you'll realize it's different, but otherwise it doesn't matter. Like, what matters more when we're recruiting is how unique our culture is, like everyone's personality, how much we all really love each other, and how much we're growing. And I think stuff like that is more important to most of the people that come to us, because I don't think I think most people don't really think that much about the actual product that they're working on when they're thinking about the actual decision that they're making. I think they think about how much impact they'll have, and if people will realize that they had that level of impact, if they'll get recognized for it, and if they'll be able to like look at themselves from before they join the company and feel like they're more badass than before, you know, because it's like the worst thing ever if you look back on your life and you're like, oh, I was so awesome like 3 years ago, like less awesome now. I don't know, like you don't want to ever have that feeling. You always want to be like, yeah, and I was an idiot 3 years ago, I'm way better now, you know.
I think that like every 3 years, I think that about the previous 3 years.
Don't you mean 18 years ago?
I was an idiot like 1 year ago, I don't know.
Good, so we talked a little bit about the hiring, so let me just kind of veer into that topic a bit more. So can you talk about teams and any suggestions that you have about how you go about building your team? Is your team distributed? How do you deal with that? I mean, do you have any like great philosophies there or great success strategies?
So no success strategy, but a learning that I've had over like enterprise company. I used to really think that the most important thing was, you know, engineering, and that's the center of the organization, and that's the most important part. And through the course of like learning about enterprise, the role of sales and kind of how value is created in a sale and all that process is increasingly like important to think about. And I think how to structure your team so that you have like a good balance between, you know, engineering, product, and sales is crucial in my opinion. Not that I have solved it, but I think it's really important.
So I spend a lot of time thinking about culture. We have a pretty distributed team. We have right now about 10 people in San Francisco, one who works remotely from Ohio. I just hired a guy who works remotely in London. We have one in India, 3 in Poland, and the balance in our office in Seville. So we're quite a distributed team, but there are a few things that we do to try and make that work, and I'm not going to say we have everything figured out. Like it is a decision that you need to spend a lot of time thinking through if you want to have a distributed team, and you need to set up the company for that. So we've put a lot of tools in place that help. We use Fabricator for project tracking, which is a really cool tool that came out of Facebook and some other people. We use Slack for internal communications. We try to document things a lot. We spend a lot of money on travel, so we fly people around a lot. In fact, I'm going to our office in Seville for 10 days on Saturday. We fly the whole company somewhere twice a year. It was Costa Rica last year, but we're getting too big for that now. So we're flying the whole team to Seville, and we do like 4 days of all hands meetings where all the teams present what they've been working on and things like that. And then we're taking them to the Canary Islands for the weekend, so everyone can just spend some fun together. Fun time. And then the next week we have an engineering sprint, and I cannot stress to you enough how important it is to get people together face to face. Like I use Hangouts every day. I work from home 2 days a week. Like we make it work, but there is no substitute for being in the office and being present and around people. No matter how well you set yourselves up for remote work, it's just really, really hard to build the right culture, or it has been for us. Without actually getting together. And one thing we're really focused on right now is, you know, we will hire good people wherever we find them, but we have a very strong bias towards people who are already in these centers where we have people. We're really trying to get more people into the office to help us, you know, continue to build out the culture that we want.
I like what you're saying about culture. I think I've worked, or at least observed, certain cultures that were part of why I decided to start Apptimize, because I was like, wow, I don't like that. And I don't want these people, like I remember at the time I was thinking like, oh, I don't want these people to affect me with their decisions. I don't like these people or something like that. But now that I have some distance from that, I think it was more the culture of the company. It was like they were not evil. They were just not really incentivized correctly, or there's some vacuum there or something going on. I think the main things that we try to focus on are, there's like this hierarchy of things you have to achieve in order to have a functional team in my company, because we have a pretty unique culture. One thing is we are supposed to try to be vulnerable with each other about what we're working on and what we're trying to improve. And in a lot of ways, this is really hard for me, because I'm supposed to have this like persona of being like this superwoman who's like really rational and like indestructible and, you know, like straight shooting or whatever. And like that is me, that is part of me. But then there's this other part where I'm like confused. I have like things that I don't know the answer to. I'm like often like, oh, can I say this to people? Like, can I even ask this question, or will me asking this question cause it to actually happen? Or, you know, just stuff like that. And everyone in my company feels this way. It's not just me because I'm the CEO, it's like everybody. Like everyone is constantly feeling this kind of doubt. And for us to be able to learn together and not be kind of torn apart internally, like destroying ourselves from within, but, you know, like united, destroying our opponents, like together, we have to be able to be honest with each other about what it is that we're working on and what it is that we don't know the answers to. And we can do it in a way that doesn't like cause chaos inside of the company, that I'm like questioning this like assumption that we've made. But we have to at least be allowed to ask this question. So we're really open internally. Everyone asks everyone about everything. And I think that also part of our culture that's unique is that there's actually a lot of conflict. And I think I'm trying to decide if I want to call that debate instead of conflict, because that has a more positive connotation. But there's a lot of conflict. Like whenever we have a meeting, I remember I made everyone read all these different books, because I feel like meetings that are where you're not disagreeing on stuff or where you're not making new decisions and having conflict are just very boring and also unnecessary. So that's one of the things that should happen, I think. And like healthy conflict is good. Like people actually, there is this natural tension between marketing and sales and between sales and product. I mean, it just like, it's there. So like you have to bring out this conflict in every meeting instead of, I don't know, like ignoring it or trying to like politically resolve it some other way. Other things that have helped me run my company better with the amount of openness and directness we have is everyone holds everyone accountable for everything. So everyone knows like, these are the things that you were accountable for last week. These are your deliverables. If they didn't happen, people are like, why didn't you do this? So it's not all on the leader. Like, I think that's made it a lot easier for me. So maybe it's all just because I'm like lazy, but I like don't want to be the one being like, hey, why did you not do this? Or did you get this done? Or like, you know, following up with everyone all the time. I want the team to do that to each other. So when you have this level of openness and ability to challenge each other, but not in a like, you know, a negative way, but because you trust each other and are open, then I think everyone can be accountable to each other instead of having like only the boss kind of like being the one that you have to persuade that you did the right thing. You're like actually accountable to your whole team, and they're all like saying, how can I help you with this objective? Like, how I can see that this is like probably not gonna get achieved. Like, what can I do? Can I take this off your plate? Stuff like that. And so I feel like my job is way easier now as like we keep emphasizing these things. And that's, I think I tell people my ultimate goal is to have like no responsibilities.
Good, so since we talked about culture, let's kind of dive deeper into that and talk about culture, product development, engineering a little bit. And it's a bit of a long question. You can answer any part you want. So is there a thing that's like enterprise culture? And you know, do you think enterprise requires a specific culture? What is the product process development that you use, and what makes it enterprisey? Yeah, how do you think it's different than, let's say, you know, like a consumer, e-commerce, or other products? Here's your thoughts.
So one of the biggest differences I feel between like consumer and enterprise in terms of culture is like the quality and consistency bar for enterprise is a lot higher. So like the Facebook motto used to be like move fast and break things. We cannot do that. That is like, you know, breaking is bad. So the people who
There's a series like that, break and bad.
Right. Breaking bad. Anyway, so you know, people who really care about quality and you know, pride in their work, and that is people who will do really well in enterprise. And I think you know, we see that being one of the values for sure.
Yeah, I think you do have to think through things a lot more. Like you can't just maybe iterate on hunches. You really need to spend more time because it takes a long time to close a big deal. We spend a ton of time on customer discovery, whereas if you're shipping like a mobile app or something, you can kind of push it out there and do A/B testing and see what works and what doesn't, and then iterate from there. You can't really do that with an enterprise product. So you have to spend a lot more time really understanding the problem set and talking to customers and walking them through kind of roadmaps and ideas and talking about what you're going to, not what you have now, but also what you're going to be doing, and you actually have to deliver on that or you really start pissing people off. So you have to be accountable to your customers on, you know, delivering on what you said, and that definitely takes kind of a different kind of mentality. I don't think that it has really impacted the culture in our company though. I mean, we still have all kinds of wacky ideas and we still do, I mean, I don't know, when I think enterprise culture, I think like really stuffy and boring and, you know, everybody in a cubicle or something like that. And, you know, we have open plan offices and free lunches and collaboration and make really stupidly embarrassing videos and all kinds of stuff that I don't think of, at least, as the traditional enterprise culture. So it's more to me about product design and approach to engineering and making deadlines and shipping things that don't break. You know, like you said, that you can't have a fail whale in enterprise software. It's just not going to cut it. But I don't think that has a major impact on how we kind of operate as a company and how it feels to work with Bitnami.
I think we made a ton of mistakes because we read too many pieces of advice that were targeted towards consumer companies. Like, just like what Reshma was saying about the move fast and break things not actually being a good motto for companies that are enterprise, there's like so much advice that are targeted towards consumer-facing companies that like we tried to follow and just instantly were like slammed down, like, oh, that's bad. I think most recently what I learned is like, well, I don't know. What I keep learning is that your relationship with your customers in an enterprise company is like, they're like your partner. Whereas I don't actually know what consumers are like, but I don't feel like I'm the partner of any of the products that I'm like using, right? I'm just some person. And like, if they mess up, I'm like not super upset. I don't feel that like they personally offended me or whatever. And then like, if they fix it later, I'm like, okay, great, whatever. But like and if they change something without telling me, like, you know, why would they tell me? But like with your customers, when you're an enterprise company, like I have to tell Rakuten like way in advance if like we're planning some change. We don't just A/B test the change on them and like, oh, we thought you would like this. Here's this new format. Like, you know, like this is a 10,000 person plus company. It has like, it's in the top, it's like number 6 in the world by revenue. You know, I don't know. So like, you have to just be a lot more deliberate about what's going on. They want to know your roadmap. They're just basically like another person that you have to talk with all the time to tell them what your plans are, and like you can't just change stuff on them without telling them. And I think like that level of communication, even after they've given you the money, like that's what like most recently I learned. Like before I was like, oh yeah, it's all about like making the sale, so now they know like we're gonna tell them everything before we make the sale, and then after they give us the money and start using the product, maybe we can talk with them less. But that's not true. Like you still have to keep talking with them constantly, forever.
That's totally true. I have like weekly or monthly calls with every major cloud provider out there still. And I can't see that stopping anytime soon.
Do you think enterprise tend to be in a bit of in a bubble? Meaning that, what do you think are some of the influences back and forth within like consumer electronics, you know, all of these other fields back and forth into enterprise? Is it like in its own little bubble?
So one of the themes that I've been seeing in enterprise software lately that's related to consumer is an emphasis on engagement. So like, you know, in the past, if you just sold some seats of software and if people don't really use them, you know, that's no big deal. But I think like modern enterprise companies care deeply about the experience, that it's good, that the engagement is high with the product, and that's a demonstration of the value that they've provided to the customer. And it's a positive change.
Yeah, that's true. I do think just the whole relationship is changing a lot in enterprise. So users are a lot more vocal and people care more about what they think. So I think, you know, this was a little bit before my time, but from what I've read in the olden days of enterprise software sales, you kind of go in at the C-level and you sell them something and they write you a big fat check and then go to their team and say, go implement this. And that is not how it works now. You know, a lot of the times you're working first at a small departmental level and kind of building up from there, and you have to get buy-in all the way up the chain before you close a deal, and then you need to make sure you continue to have that buy-in so you can drive engagement numbers, or you're going to lose your customers. And now that everything's moving to subscription models instead of kind of a one-price enterprise license agreement, you have to continually make people happy. And so that's a really big and important change, I think. I don't necessarily think there's a bubble in enterprise. I mean, I think there are a lot of companies that have crazy high valuations, but I don't think it's a bubble. I think there is just not a lot of innovation for a very, very long time in the enterprise. And finally, because of the cultural changes and everything else that people's, you know, it's changing a little bit now. It's like the time was so ripe and the technology is there and people get easier access to it, you know, from everything from like BYOL or BYOD, sorry, I've been talking about BYOL a lot. BYOD policies and things like that. There's just kind of no stopping the influx of new technology now.
Yeah, I think as long as the new companies are building something that doesn't suck, like most of the enterprise software that's out there is really bad. So like as long as the new startups are better than that, then I don't see how it would be a bubble. There are a lot of bad enterprise startups, just like, you know, any kind of startup, but I don't think that's like really related to the bubble thing. Like if you look at a lot of these new software companies that are out there, I'm like really, really happy they exist. So I think there is some where like I'm using a lot of the new startups that I know about. Like we all use each other because you're like this new generation of like better enterprise software and you're each other's consumers now. But I think that's awesome. Everyone's gonna move over to this new wave of doing things.
Cool, so let's talk about open source. It's obviously a subject that's near and dear to my heart. We are a great believer in open source at Docker, and in fact, it's a big part of what we do, how we do things, our culture, everything. It's huge. We also we provide open source products, but we also user of open source. And I'm curious about your company. What's your relationship to open source? And then can you then expand it to tell me your thoughts about how do you think open source actually impacts the enterprise software space?
So use of open source is kind of an obvious benefit. I think especially in enterprise, a long tail of features and functionality that's needed, finding a open source that supports that is really great. Again, you need to customize your enterprise software, so if you have some open source packages that can do that the community can use, it really drives engagement and really helps make your product at the level of flexibility that it needs to be. I'm really fascinated by the new business models Docker and Bitnami and all, but you guys are probably more qualified to talk about that, which is really exciting and kind of a new frontier. And I think overall, it seems so ironic that free software is such a big part of enterprise software, but it is really kind of crucial throughout the product and with what people use every day.
Yeah, so we work with open source a lot. We package over 100 different open source apps in development environments. So obviously, I've been paying a lot of attention to open source in a while, and I know more about open source licensing than I ever wanted to. But I do think it's done a lot of really spectacularly good things, and some of them are just good for humanity, right? Like Ubuntu creating an amazingly good operating system that has helped students and children in Africa get access to technology that they never had. There's just so much good that's coming out of open source. Even with Bitnami, we've done a bunch of pro bono work to help clinics get set up with certain tools that they need to track patients in developing countries and things like that. And there's just so much cool stuff you can do when the technology is freely available. But I think it's also just had a really important impact on software development and business as a whole. Open source has put a tremendous amount of pressure on enterprise software companies to get their butts in gear. Like you said, Nancy, they were shipping a lot of crap, and there was no way to compete with them because these companies were so entrenched, and it's nobody got fired for buying IBM kind of mindset, right? And with open source moving from the infrastructure level to the application level and all these amazing apps for everything from CRM to collaboration to bug tracking and all these fantastic development tools coming out have really put pressure on existing companies to up their game. You can't suck anymore. I mean, there's probably still some big companies that have sucky software, but they're going away if they don't innovate. There's just a tremendous amount of pressure there. And it's also changed the business models a lot and distribution models. So when I think of the benefits to companies who are building open source software, one of the biggest changes that open source has brought is just distribution, beyond changing it. Because I think the reality is most people who use open source don't actually change the code. They'd like to know that they can if they want to, and if the company behind it goes out of business, they'll still have access to the software. But the reality is very few people actually change the code. But what open source does is it allows you to circumvent buying processes. So somebody in a department can download an app and get it up and running, and then maybe they go back and buy a commercial version if there's one available. And so it's just much easier to get software into people's hands. And that in turn has put pressure on enterprise software companies to make it easier to try out their software. You don't have to go through some 90-day hoop jumping process to get access to an application that you want to try and then put up this big POC and stuff. Between open source and the cloud and everything, you just click, and boom. There's a lot of ways besides Bitnami to do that. And that's making everyone in the software business change their model and give you easier access to software, not make you jump through so many hoops to get your hands on it. And it's just simplified the buying process and brought prices down and pushed people towards a subscription model. Sorry, that was long, but.
I think from my perspective, open source has created this new level of celebrities where they're amazing at programming in open source. And one of our engineers is pretty famous, and he's like way more famous than I am. He has at least 2 orders of magnitude more Twitter followers. And he's like, we'll like interview people and they'll recognize him and stuff and be like, oh my God, you're that guy. I thought you were like a 40-year-old like guy who's been working on this since the beginning of time. And he's like 25. And I remember like even, yeah, people will meet him and think like, oh, I thought you were there when like they first developed like app, like I don't know, like Steve Jobs first developed this, and he was like, no, I was not born yet. So I don't know, I think it's really awesome for the level of talent that it'll surface and recognize and allow those people to contribute.
Yeah, we've hired people for that, sorry, but we've hired people because they did a really good job on an open source project, and we can go see their code and brought them in the company that way, so it's great for that too.
Do we have time for one more question? Yeah. So I'm just curious, any predictions for the enterprise field from you?
I think that there will be like a lot of incumbents in enterprise software today will be replaced in the next 10 years, and like including some in like the Fortune 15, and it will be like a time of great change.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I totally agree. This is a tough one. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change in the way software is acquired and deployed in the enterprise, and companies like Docker are really helping push that change. How software is developed is going to change a lot, and where the power lies is going to change a lot, and where the purchasing happens is already starting to change a lot, and I think that will continue. It's not a very brazen prediction, because I think everyone probably agrees with me, but yeah.
I'm glad I got to go last on this, but actually it's because I have a lot of crazy predictions that I don't want to tell people, and I was thinking like, which one do I want to say? So I'm actually not sure if people would think this is controversial at all, but I think that there's a whole set of companies, like the past generation of enterprise companies, where their strategy was kind of becoming a suite, where they were like, oh, I'm gonna do start with this thing and then become like everything, and this huge dashboard that like everyone uses for everything imaginable. And I think this is gonna go away. This was a bad thing of the past. And I think it happened because it was hard to install stuff, and it was just easier, this thing's already there, so let's like cross-sell and like just buy it for the same thing, but like some new feature. That's not the case anymore, so I think we're gonna have companies that replace those companies by being really good at particular things. And you're not gonna have just this one thing that is like your suite of whatever. I think there's gonna be a lot more fluidity, a lot more pressure to innovate as a result, and a lot more like improvement in the user experience for that particular thing. So you'll have like, okay, I'm using Gmail for this, but MailChimp for this, and blah, blah, blah for this. It's not like I'm using one thing for like my full pipeline.
Yeah, now that APIs are so much more prevalent and expected, that can actually happen, where it couldn't before, right? Because everything was like so siloed, you couldn't get information around, but now stuff's being built differently.
Cool, thank you very much. You want to
Hi, thanks so much. That was wonderful. I was wondering if each of you could share the story of your first customer. So how you acquired that customer, how you figured out that what you were building was right to show them initially when you probably weren't psychologically prepared to show them, and how much that cost in terms of both time and money.
Okay, so don't tell Rakuten that they were our first customer, but they were our first customer because like they saw that we launched in January of 2013 or 2014. Yeah, we launched in January 2014. They saw it somehow on Techcrunch. One of their like mobile or one of their web optimization people was connected with one of my investors. I mean, she was like married to one of my investors, and still is. And she recognized it a little bit somehow, so like heard of us, and then she introduced us to her team, like just emailed out the article of our launch, And then the team contacted me, and I remember doing the demo for them in my bathroom, because at that point we were like working on my house a lot of the time. So I have a really big bathroom though, so it was fine. I like did it in my bathroom where like part of the demo is I have this webcam where I show them a video of, well, a live video of like me doing something on my phone. And so I did that, and it was really obviously in my bathroom because like you can see the tile, like, you know, it looks like a bathroom. And then the whole time I was like, well, we're never gonna get them. This is just like practice for me to like practice demoing or whatever, you know, because I don't know anything. And then it was still somehow moving along, and we got to this other stage where they were like, oh, come into our office. And I'm like, well, I've been here before. We've gone into people's offices and they've like not done anything. So we went to the office, and then, but at this point we made our first business hire, and he had not been a salesperson before, but he was more salesy than me. Like in my previous career of high frequency trading, I never even had customers. We traded our own money. So he was way better than me in sales because he's at least been a consultant and he had customers. So he like realized that like what was going on in this meeting was like they were like introducing us to stakeholders, and we need to like write down what they were saying and stuff like that. And then we just somehow moved through this organization. He had a bunch more lunches with them. I, in parallel, would like email to them whatever he pasted me, and like he would like write the email, and then I would like send it to the people that he committed me to do. And then like, so we in parallel like navigated this organization, and he was like, I made it this goal for him that he needed to close this deal within 4 months, because we were trying to like drum up some money for like hopefully our Series A. And I was like, we don't have any customers, but I think we need at least one customer for our Series A. So let's like get Rocketech, because they're huge, and like, you know, they would pay us 6 figures, and it would be like one customer, but it'd be like a large customer. And so he was like just intensely focused on closing them. And it was like, there was so many parts of this process, because like this is a gigantic Japanese company that's way bigger. Like they're in so many more businesses than Amazon. They're like, just calling them the Amazon of Japan is like not doing them the service. Like they're like in transportation, they do everything. So they even came to our office, and I remember we were really freaked out about this because they flew in this guy from Japan to, like, he's the real guy who's gonna sign the document, and he wanted to visit the office. So like I had to make them tea, and we were like really freaked out because Japanese people, they're crazy, like what do they expect? And then like we did the whole thing, we showed them the PowerPoint, and then afterwards like they signed the deal, and it took like 4 months, which was amazing. Like no one believed it when we told them, because normally Japanese companies take like 2 years easily to make this type of decision. And I think we were just something that they really wanted at the time. I think we got really lucky. I think that we had a fantastic demo, and it was something that they like were able to demo really easily internally, because a few of the leaders in Rakuten were like, oh yeah, I just demoed you in like this meeting that I had the other week, and that's amazing. Like the idea that he was able to install our software on his own, and he's not a developer, and then demo it to his whole team and seem like a genius for showing them this technology they've never seen before, made us the sale. So I think it was randomness on our end, our sales guy being awesome, and our technology being amazing for what they needed to demo at this time to get the buy-in from the organization. Oh, he's my friend from MIT. He lived in my dorm, and then he got a master's in computer science. He also studied computer science, and then he was a consultant at this company called Applied Predictive Technologies, which does A/B testing for like retail stores. And then we do A/B testing for native apps, so he was really interested. And then I like kind of conned him into joining, because like in the beginning he described it as a deep committed relationship with APT, this company. Like he was on track to become a VP. They also had his green card, and they were like, they'd been applying for it for like 6 years or whatever, you know, and it was like only, 3 more months left to go, and I was like, no, join my company. So then, he left, he joined the company, we're doing the green card thing all over again. He's like amazing and learned all this stuff that, I think like he was having a really chill time at APT towards the end, so you have to like show them how killing yourself working at a job is actually really fun and a thing that's missing from their life that they're gonna want more of, and also make them feel like, yeah, you can all these other objections are like not a big deal. The green card thing, not a big deal. We'll just do it again, or you can get married.
So we actually started out with like a piece of package software, which isn't very exciting to tell you about our first customer because somebody literally came and bought it online. But then we very much evolved as a company into what we're doing now. And our first kind of bigger professional services kind of contracts that we sold, one of them was a company called Splunk that's public now, and another one was Sure CRM and MySQL. And what was kind of funny was we were at this conference and we were showing some of the stuff that we were doing, and it was this open source business conference, and all these companies were just launching. Like Sure CRM was like 4 guys. And they came over and everybody started talking to us about what we could do and how we could make their business applications so easy for users to deploy, which was really important for an open source application vendor because the people who would be evaluating their software could have never set it up on their own. And they kind of saw some of the stuff that we'd done and they thought, hey, that looks really cool. And we went in and independently in the course of a couple months or a month maybe, we closed them all, or we were close to closing them, and they all happened to meet up at an event randomly. And they'd be like, oh, you're working with Bitnami. Oh wait, you're working with Bitnami. Oh my God, everyone's working with Bitnami. And it just so happened that like the 2 or 3 customers that we had all ran into each other at the same event, and suddenly everybody thought we were like ubiquitous when we were really like 4 people working out in an apartment in Spain. I honestly don't remember. It was a long time ago.
So for a product like ours, like people won't sign up. It's a medical system that trusts patient data, blah blah. They won't sign up. No one will sign up for it unless their hair is on fire. So our first customer, we were courting a successful mobile ultrasound practice in Southern California, run by 2 brothers. And turns out that little brother was not really happy with big brother and wanted to split off. So we took little brother's business and started with that. And it was a family business. Like everyone is like aunt, uncle, brother, sister, and us. And we had all sorts of weird things. Like I showed up with my colleague. He's about 25-year-old Indian man. To install, or not install, just kind of do the initial setup for one of the physicians, and he was like, oh yeah, now that you're finished setting up your software, my TV is busted, and, and he points at my colleague, can you help me? And he's like, okay, and goes and he fixes his TV. So you have to do anything you can to get your first customer. I mean, luckily for enterprise, your first contract can like help you survive. Typically like 5 figures or 6 figures. So it's a big break to get one.
Cool. By the way, we're open source, so that's our distribution you mentioned.
Yeah. So hey, thanks. My question is specific to healthcare, but I guess you could abstract it to anything. And I guess it's sort of related to the question you just answered, but how do you persuade somebody in like a really regulated, entrenched industry where like the gut response is to say, oh, that'll never work, like, oh, like, you can't, I don't know if you can relate to this, but oh, like, that's not allowed. How do you persuade them to adopt something new? How do you get that initial traction?
So that's an excellent question. I think that it's very hard to convince somebody who just, believes that it can't, for example, you can't send your private data to the cloud, that it could ever be done. The tactic that I would use was typically to out-worry people. So they would be like, is your stuff secure? I'm like, well, we have like, this type of encryption and this type of protection, all this type of layers. Have you thought about this? Does your current system have that? Because you should probably think about that. I mean, that could be a hole. And then if it doesn't work, you should always think about the other unsecure points. Like what if someone has something on their device? And you just like rebel without a pause, go on and on and on. And actually, sometimes that works. Not 100% success, but I would think about it that way. Especially in healthcare, because the more acronyms you use, it's helpful.
I think the
main objection we get is if Apple or Google shut us down for circumventing the app stores. And it's a totally legit concern because they do arbitrary random stuff like that all the time. But all the top apps in the store already use us or some version of an internal tool that does what Apptimize sort of does. So I think, no, it's not a worry unless you're worried that all the other apps in the App Store are gonna also be in violation of this. So I usually try to make it seem like a thing that is really common already. I don't know if this is possible to do if that's not accurate. It probably still is. Like you can just give the impression that like, oh, no, everyone's already doing this. Like, didn't you know that this was like the new thing?
Question, how do you guys think about how to price your product?
I think Erica should go first, or maybe Mariana.
I didn't hear the question.
How we price how we think about pricing our product. It's a hard problem, right? And it's one that we're constantly evaluating. So just so some of you know, like we actually have 3+ revenue streams and kind of related lines of business. So end users, we have a SaaS offering called Bitnami Cloud Hosting that makes it easy to deploy and manage your apps in the cloud. Cloud vendors pay us because we drive huge amounts of usage on their platforms and we help bring all this content to them so they get like an instant app store. And now ISVs pay to be part of our platform because we can get them to our 1 million+ users a month and allow them to support all these different cloud platforms. So we have like, 6-7 figure annual deals, and then we have people who pay us like $25 a month. And well, the ASP is like 70, but in that range. And then we have ISVs who pay us, kind of just five-ish, 6 figures. And it's an evolutionary process, I think. I mean, it's kind of easier with the SaaS app because you can change things and test things a little bit more easily if you have a good billing system in place. We haven't spent a ton of time on that, and we're probably actually undercharging people, and we know that, and we just kind of let it go for now. On the ISV side, we just spend a lot of time understanding like where they invest from a distribution and engineering perspective, and we take a look at the impact that we can have on their business and how much money that we're going to save them. So we actually take like a lot of different inputs and we try and focus on how much value we're really we're really able to provide to their organization. And then after we get people, after people sign on, we spend a lot of time trying to understand what kind of an ROI they've gotten and where we can do better, and we use that to inform our pricing as it evolves. I'm sure it won't be what it is now in 3 years, though. It's still early days.
For us, it's actually a really relevant question. First of all, we price it free, if you're arguing with that. No, but more seriously, we do have a business model, and pricing is a very relevant topic because we're in the midst of releasing this product called Docker Hub Enterprise, which is an on-prem registry for actually many enterprises that really want it. And one of the things a lot of companies tempted to look at cost in their pricing, and that's like a danger. Instead, we're looking at value and comparables, like what did VMware do when they price their offerings, what do other companies in that space price, and how does the customer perceive the value, and trying to go from there. Actually, recently got an advice from entrepreneur on pricing, because pricing, again, I think is such an important thing. It will determine your revenue so much, and his advice was like this: whatever price you think about, multiply by 6. So.
That's totally true. With our packaged product, it's called Install Builder, we've doubled our pricing, I don't know how many times over the years, and every time I'd be sitting there like holding my breath thinking, oh no, it's going to stop selling, and every time our revenues have grown. We might get slightly fewer customers, but they're better quality anyway, because they are easier to work with and they have reasonable expectations in terms of support and SLA and things like that, where for some reason people are paying like $10 a month a lot of the time, expect 24/7 instantaneous responses, where somebody who's paying you like 10 grand a month realizes that it might take you 24 to 48 hours to get back to them. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it repeated over and over and over again. So I totally agree with that. And I also think sometimes it just varies very widely when you're dealing with an enterprise product from customer to customer. Like I've heard through the back channel, and this is super painful as an entrepreneur, but I've heard several times that we've totally, underpriced things and that we're actually providing a lot more value. And then I've had other customers who think we're just so ridiculously, exorbitantly expensive that we're like the super premium product. So a lot of it depends on the customer and their priorities and things like that too.
I happen to be the last question. My question is for existing enterprise software, for example, let's say SharePoint. And Apptimize, if you look at new modern enterprise software, trying to get people to use it, there are no solutions out there. You can probably talk to them, show how it's important, how it's good, what's the benefit, and then sell it. But for people who have built, who spent years already on existing software, is there any strategy that works for them to replace that with, or to try out new enterprise software? Has anything worked?
So far, we've taken the strategy of saying that we integrate with them, so it's like, you can use it together, and then hopefully over time we'll just expand and then do like a much better job in everything. But we'll just show like, oh, a lot of our customers also use, Adobe for this, or they also use whatever, Google Analytics for this, and then they use us for this though, because we're perfectly tailored for this, and we're intensely focused on this other thing, and with them, they're not like that, obviously, so this is going to be a better result for you. So I think I just try to make that argument, and it's not like we need them to upend their whole lives or anything. It's just a pretty simple thing that fits into their normal habits, and try to make it seem as little of a change as possible. But I don't know if that's just my approach. I think our salespeople do something more aggressive and different.
Just a quick comment, I think the cost of replacement, you really have to have a substantially better product in order for people to replace you. Typically you're supporting some crazy scenario that they need and don't have support for, or it's quite a high bar.
Just to add to that, somebody mentioned how open source is a distribution, and it's true. And I think between open source and SaaS, you have so many backdoors into your organization that it's actually quite amazing. You no longer have this kind of convincing process, but often it will start like a grassroots effort. Some creative developers will start replacing a product. So that's kind of, I see a lot of that happen. So aside from a more traditional, here's migration tools, or here's a formula of how to do that, you just see sometimes products, companies amazed at how much their developers and IT use without them knowing, and it's already there, and it's already being replaced. So this was the last question. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. We'll be around.